Welcome. My name is Wil Torres, Director of Outreach here at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And today's topic is stepping into your power. And I think this is something that as we approach the application process or any application process, even when you're applying to jobs, sometimes it can feel like you're putting something out there and then everything is out of your control. It might feel like there are a lot of factors um, that are telling you no. These voices that are undermining your confidence or telling you to go a different direction than one that you might have taken otherwise. And so how do we think about this in a way that will give you back the power, agency, and kind of the steering ability over what comes next? So today's going to be a little bit experimental, so thank you for joining me on this. We are going to be focusing on you and ways to think about some of the stuff that's application adjacent that might actually help inform and shape and kind of influence your experience through this process. So this, for the first time, we are not going to be starting with a holistic review. I also don't have a too long didn't watch section because we're not actually going to be talking about the application per se. But starting kind of with that foundation, it all starts with you. We're going to have a little moment of nerding out where I'm going to provide a little bit of what I've been thinking about in terms of the application experience and what it's like to go through it and ways, for us to different ways to conceptualize it. A little bit on the stories we tell ourselves. We talk about how powerful stories are, the power of narrative. And then we kind of think about it as, how do I communicate who I am to these other people through this process? But just as important to that are the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and how that shapes what's possible, the potential, or even holding ourselves back, inadvertently self-sabotaging, whatever that could look like. So let's name, unpack, and explore there. And then I have an extended analogy about keeping the fire going as a way to start tackling some of these issues, just very broadly, and then kind of share your thoughts. Let's decompress with each other. Let's think about this as a supportive space where even though I might be the one visible, I really do care and I want to be able to engage with you all that much more today. So preface, I am not an expert by any means in terms of, I'm not a counselor, I'm not a psychologist. If anything, I am an admissions nerd, an enthusiast, and someone who really cares about this work. And so as you start to explore, please don't take anything I say as truth with the capital T, but use it as a foundation to start exploring, seeing how things might click or resonate, or using this as an opportunity to say, hey, maybe I do want to go talk to somebody who might have a professional background in whatever this might be. Or maybe this is the inspiration for you to continue developing your own expertise, right? So similar to all of the other advice, kind of tips and best practices I've been providing throughout application week, take all of this with a grain of salt, just new ways, thinking about the value of diversity in the learning environment, right? It's learning is spurred and nurtured by seeing things from new directions, confronting diverse perspectives and challenging your worldview, right? And so hopefully I'm introducing a few different ways to think about not just output of the application process, that application, but also the process itself. Got some of that meta analysis and self-awareness to help you understand where some of the levers of efficacy, efficiency, and productivity might be for you. Okay, so question we asked at Stanford, right? What is it that you really want to do? If you didn't have to worry about salary, income, whether or not you were like actually able to or qualified to do something, what would that be? I think there is a lot to that philosophy that informs, how you might approach this. I do not care about how qualified you might be, whether or not you have a background or have already started putting in the work to make this pivot, transition, whatever that looks like for you. That might be different from other institutions. So again, take this all with a grain of salt, but hopefully that goes from being intimidating because, you know, oftentimes we're like told, here's what you need to be doing. Here's what you should or should not do. And it becomes liberating because now you are able to start charting some of these paths and pivots and left turns, right turns, U-turns, whatever that looks like, which can be scary if this is the first time you're approaching the process. It can be intimidating. And if you think about some of the folks out there who we look up to, these trailblazers, the ones who are starting kind of how do we tackle these problems and issues out there, whether it's in traditional workspaces or starting your own venture because there's nothing out there that really addresses the need in a way that you think we might be able to do it, right? This is coming back to you. It might feel uncomfortable depending on where you are in the world, culturally, how you were raised, the forces around you. And so this is one of those times I also invite you to kind of play around in this kind of stretch space, right? Push yourself enough so that you can see how you're feeling, get a sense of like where things are working, where they're not, but not so far that, you know, you snap and kind of withdraw. So it's also about understanding and learning what that looks like for you, right? So coming back to this idea of power, this is where I get to nerd out. So again, this is not necessarily the kind of foundation or the way that Stanford GSB application kind of might be built. But one thing that I've been thinking a lot about as an individual, as a practitioner, and as a nerd are like, what shapes this experience? Like what shapes and informs and inspires behavior? So this is an adapted model of social cognitive theory. So this is actually research from Albert Bandura, who is a psychologist who laid a lot of the foundation for this. He's not the only person who's worked in this space, but definitely one of the ones who kind of helped spark the movement, right? So if you think about it, human behavior kind of determined by three kind of general buckets. These cognitive factors, sometimes known as personal factors, what you know, what are your expectations from about doing something? Will you be successful or not? And your attitudes towards it. There's the behavioral factors, practice, the skills you have and are able to develop, self-efficacy, otherwise known as the belief that you're able to do something. And then environmental factors. What are the resources, experiences? What are some of these role models and folks that you might be able to say like, oh, I can be that. I see myself there because that's somebody who I can learn from, right? And so three big takeaways here are thinking about, let's say that the application process is that behavior that we're thinking about. How do we make it through the entire process, go through the action steps to complete and submit, and hopefully ultimately enroll at the GSB, another program, or fill in that middle however you will. Couple big learnings here. Three, hopefully nice and easy, and these align with the three things that I just briefly mentioned. So you learn from the world around you, right? And you don't just learn, but there's something called like reciprocal dynamism, I believe, or determinism, where changes in one thing influence the others. So let's say you are learning more about the GSB application process. Now, because of that, you have a different sense of belief in what you're able to do. You've learned a couple new skills that you're able to practice that helps change the different expectations and attitudes you might have about this, right? Because now you are maybe finding people that have some commonality, you're creating a new community that helps encourage and inspire you, that in turn can change some of these other things. You learn, you're influenced and inspired, or conversely, might feel differently, and whether that's disinspired, that's not the word, but you know what I mean, right? You are influenced by the world around you and vice versa. Next, You'll tend to do things if you believe that the benefits of it will outweigh the costs. So the benefits of studying and how much effort am I thinking about investing into the test, the GMAT or the GRE versus, will there be that kind of score that I hope for? Will that that return on investment? What's that inner calculus for me? And that's going to be one of those things that kind of pushes you in one way or the other. So that's some of those cognitive factors: knowledge, expectations, attitudes. And then this one, you're more likely to do stuff if you have the skills and knowledge to do it, right? And so I'm really just boiling these down in a way that kind of resonates for me. I definitely encourage you, if you want to learn more about this, check out some of the kind of research out there. There's actually a fair amount of it, and figure out how to make sense of it and translate it into your world. And here, I think a lot about self-efficacy. What are the beliefs we have about ourselves, about whether or not we can do the application? If I can communicate about who I am in the written form, if I am going to be, how I'm going to do in an interview, right? My hot take based on this is you do have agency on this journey, right? And I think that's something in all of my conversations over my career in admissions, that is one of the biggest tensions and hurdles. I know sometimes people say, like, what's the biggest mistake or biggest barrier, whatever. Instead of something tactical about the application in and of itself, I think the biggest barrier that I've observed over time are some of the mental barriers we place on ourselves. The belief that we are putting something out there and everything is out of our control. It might seem like a small moment. You're filling out an application. You're submitting it to an admissions office. But even within there are moments, and you have multiple locuses of control, foci. I'm not a linguist, so please forgive me, but there are multiple moments where you're able to have some agency and power over what comes next. Remember, thinking about the reciprocal determination, that dynamic model of those three pieces of the triangle, you are able to shape and inform outcomes. Okay, so what does this look like in the application process? So let's play around with it a little bit more. And then I'll start connecting this to some of the best practices, mindsets, and other things that, in the claim, reframe, claim, and empower model that I also think a lot about. We'll get to that spot as well. So let's talk a little bit more about some of these cognitive or personal factors. And here, how much do you know about the process? And I would also caution, like, how much do you actually know that's truth, right? Or how much are you gleaning from websites, forums, folks who claim to be experts, but actually might have other motives, right? How do you understand and build kind of the knowledge set to help you understand, okay, what will the payoff be for me? How does this shape my approach, right? There's the environmental factors. I did mention this briefly, but what are the communities that we move through? What are the examples and role models that we have? And this, I fully recognize that not everybody has a role model or someone you can speak to about the experience. This is where exploring and finding communities of support, communities of practitioners, this is one of those pieces that I keep coming back towards. And then the behavioral factors. And this is actually one of those pieces that inspired Application Week. Actually, all of these, if you think about it, I've found that oftentimes people don't actually know about the holistic review process in the way that we do, or there's a different conception of it. So in unpacking and demystifying what's out there, helping reframe some of these expectations so that you have kind of that belief in yourself, providing a community. So thinking about myself as one of those kind of members of the community that help you on that can help model and shape the way we do this. Again, you have agency and power within this process. So as you step back and you think about what are some of these motivating factors, Where are the places that I might be able to, or the places that speak to my ability to keep going and be persistent and make it through? Kind of play around with this. I found that there are actually a lot of places in my life where I've been able to unpack and have a little bit of fun with this, knowing that self-reflection, it can be tough, especially if this is not something we've practiced. Notice that behavioral factors, the skills of self-efficacy, it's just like the application. You've applied to maybe undergraduate admissions once. You might have one or two other application experiences within there. You might have written one personal statement, but there's that element of practice that helps build the self-efficacy. And so really understanding, even if you think about athletes or folks who are really skilled at their trade, chefs that you look up to, the ones that earn Michelin stars, they're going out, they're learning, they're in communities and spaces that encourage and inspire that. They're developing the skill sets and doing them over and over and over to be able to make that three-pointer, to decorate that cake, whatever that looks like. And it's going to be similar for the application, and more so less about the application, but the process, the reflection, the introspection. It takes practice, writing, communicating the values that you bring to the table. It'll take practice, and hopefully that'll help build the momentum that you'll need to find, create, and shape the paths that are meaningful for you. Okay, so what does this translate into the stories we tell about ourselves? And here are 4 big themes that I found can either hinder or help us. So first, starting with culture fit or culture add. One of the questions that I often get is, how can I demonstrate that I'm a fit for your program? So think about those 2 words that you use to describe yourself. We're going to do this. In the Q&A box, put two words that you think of when you think of Stanford. I just laughed a little bit because Rudra Neal mentioned they've been there and they've plated a 27 component salad over 1,000 times, right? There's that skill, that practice, that self-efficacy there. So thank you for sharing. But what are the first 2 words that pop into your mind when you think Stanford? So go ahead and put that in the Q&A box. It's also interesting to see how other people might be thinking about this. Okay, vulnerability, innovation, wealth, innovation, friends, future, entrepreneurship, tech, change lives, leadership. Lots of themes here about change, leadership, free thinking, innovation, curiosity. Okay, future leader, beautiful, thank you. Okay, now, oftentimes the ways that we think about fit, it's, okay, what are these few things that we're hearing about this institution? Whether it's word on the street, it's some of the things that we're seeing in newsprint and media, maybe it's the things that the schools are promoting themselves. And oftentimes the flashy things are the ones that get out there. Now that you've put some of those things into kind of the Q&A box, think about the words that you use to describe about yourself, right? For me, that was nurturing and educator. If using Tyler's examples here of innovation and empathy, some of those might overlap, right? But there might be something there that doesn't. So maybe for Camila, the innovation, I'm not necessarily thinking of myself as an innovative person. That doesn't mean you're not a quote unquote fit, but rather, hey, for me, that nurturing piece is something I bring to the table, right? As you think of some of these different descriptors of who you are, rather than thinking about, am I a fit? Yes, no. Think, okay, is there an overlap? Is there a resonance with what I'm seeing out there? If not, right, maybe that's something I add and I bring to the table. And this is a conversation I try to have a lot around these notions about non-traditional. Often if we don't see those examples, those role models who we can see ourselves in, we think, okay, that's not for us. Another way to approach that is, I don't see that person yet. Could I be that person? Here are some perspectives and things that I can bring to the table that can enhance the conversations in the community, culture, wherever, classroom. Okay? So really thinking about that additive element to it. Right? For those who might think, hey, I am someone who I actually do see a lot of myself there. Awesome. What are the elements of your experience that help you feel like, I will thrive there? This is a path that makes sense for me, right? And if you kind of explore and widen the aperture of how you see yourself, you also bring something extremely valuable and different to the table. The more that you're able to understand and kind of unpack who you are, the more and more you're able to see, here are all these additive things that I bring. Here are the ways that it makes sense that this school, we get together and I can also make you better, right? Think about, given the things that you want to do, how can we help you do it versus, am I right for this school? Is that school right for me? Because at the end of the day, you're the one that matters, not Stanford, not the other institutions. It's your goals that we're hopefully able to center there. And this is something I always encourage folks to do, whether you're deep in the application process or early on and thinking about, is business school right for me? What is it that you want to do? What do you want to get out of it? Will business school help you get there? Will Stanford help you get there? And what does that look like? Next, we've already started to talk a little bit about the deficit thinking and a strengths-based approach to this. So another example I have is oftentimes when I'm like, oh, why business school? Why now? People will lean on, here's a gap. I need this. I don't have this, right? And because you're so focused on that, we tend to forget, here are these other strengths and things I bring to the table. Another way to think about it is like, here's an opportunity for me to grow. Here's something I want to explore. Here's a skill I want to understand. Can I turn it into a superpower, right? Here are some of the things that do make me effective. How can I elevate that? Or how can I understand where my strengths are and the full texture and dimension of who I am to leverage that for full effect wherever you are. It's these small ways that we understand ourselves that could help kind of motivate and kind of build that momentum forward. You'd be surprised at how many times I have conversations with people and they're like, well, I don't know how to say, is this a compelling reason to go to business school? I'm like, tell me about it. And they'd speak it. And I'm like, that makes sense. You just told me in 2 sentences and it was beautiful. I was like, why are you doubting it? This is the moment where rather than thinking about, is my rationale good enough, to this is my rationale, and owning it. So it's these small moments. Sometimes you need somebody to check you on that because you've said it and thought about it so much that it just becomes kind of rote for you and you stop challenging it. So part of this is also continually challenging the narratives that we're telling ourselves, the way we speak and understand and think about ourselves. And am I thinking about it and approaching this in a way that's constructive for me? Next, be a critical consumer. And I use consumer in air quotes for a couple reasons. And so again, this is Wil's hot takes, not necessarily a reflection of the stance of my institution or even the industry, but class profiles. I know I took a deep breath there, but I think class profiles can be very powerful in providing some insight into, okay, what does that school look like right now? At least at the GSB, those are not things that I am looking for, those are outcomes. So questions about, okay, I don't have the average, is that good or is that bad? Will that help or harm me? Again, if you look back at all of the webinars and events we have, it's a holistic review process, that's just one part, right? And these are only single dimensions. It's not even thinking about the nuance and depth. And let's say for finance, the many different ways finance can manifest, whether it's in backgrounds or interest, right? And so how can we elevate and understand and illuminate yours? Okay, the stories that we see published by schools. And I'm going to use Stanford as the entrepreneurship piece. You need to be an entrepreneur to get into Stanford, or you need to want to be an entrepreneur after. Not true. You see a lot of those articles because those are some of the flashy news stories. It's not often that you see a story about someone who does something really well, but it's just their everyday. But that is also amazing, right? And so you see these single data points that we often hang our hats on, but that's not the fullness of the story. So recognizing, yeah, that's awesome. The hope oftentimes is these are going to be some of those inspiring pieces. These might be folks that you're in the classroom with, or they might be part of your future community. Totally true. I've often found, though, that sometimes those can often have the unintended implication of getting us to think, I'm not them, so I can't get in, which is the furthest from the truth. So coming back to some of these kind of themes already, I'm not them, great. What can I add to the conversation knowing I'm a different person than them? How can we elevate and inspire and learn from each other? Remember, if we think about difference as a fundamental part of the educational process, right? What do you bring to that table? And the next part is there are also going to be a lot of articles out there by second and third party places. There's going to be places on like Reddit or whatever forums. Take all of that stuff with a grain of salt, right? Because it might seem that there's a lot of evidence in that space, but maybe there's an ulterior motive there. Maybe people are coming at it from a very distinct angle. What are some other places for you to interrogate and question? So maybe you see a theme come up. Maybe that's a theme that you talk to one of us in the admissions office. I've heard that, I love helping unpack what that can mean, and more like connect it to some of the things that you're interested. I heard that blank. How does this impact me if I'm a blank? And then we can go ahead and have that conversation. Other ways to kind of demystify the world and some of these mysteries and that fog that might be kind of in your kind of foreground. And one more time, embrace your story. Every story has power. There are some that, get put on the websites. There's some that aren't. That doesn't mean one is more or less important than the other. You do not need to shape, model, or emulate anybody else's story to be full and complete and have a perspective to share. Share only what you feel comfortable sharing. If it's important to you, it's important to us. That's another theme that I've been really trying to elevate. And to take that next step, if it's important to you, so what? Why is it important? Get me to some of that reason and rationale. How are some of these lived experiences so fundamental to the perspective that you bring to the classroom and community? And if you're not sure kind of where that goes, how do you show, don't tell? Tell me about a time when. Bring me to some of these experiences that help me understand how that lived experience or your experiences as an individual shape that, right? I mentioned this earlier this week, but the last thing I want anybody to do is feel like you have to commodify an experience or feel like you're using something as a quote unquote sob story, or you have to cheapen something because you're trying to use it as a tool to get in or for some kind of reason that doesn't feel good for you. If you're in that space, don't, right? If anything, reframe that, especially for us at the GSB. Because of these things, who are you? And I'm smiling because one time I used the analogy of that one Kelly Clarkson song, Because of You, right? For her, because of you, she doesn't walk on the sidewalk. I'm horrible with lyrics, but you know what? Hopefully you know where I'm getting to. Because of you, blank, right? And if you think about that you as these lived experiences, interactions you've had, motivations, inspirations, because of you, I blank. That next piece is the part that I find some of the most interesting and fascinating. So if in doubt, Kelly Clarkson, you might have a few more listens because of the session. So hopefully we get there. All right. Now, keeping the fire going, and then I want to jump into the Q&A box because I think there's some really beautiful questions here. So thank you for putting yourselves out there. But okay, keeping this fire going, burn it down. I'm not a pyromaniac. I'm not recommending arson, but sometimes we lean into the growth, but we need different types of analogies, ways of approaching it. Sometimes there's that fire in you of here's what I want to do. Here's that inspiration. I want to put it out into the world. All right, so let's put a few more buckets around that to figure out how we might be able to articulate that, nurture and nourish that fire so it doesn't go out. So what does fire you up? Is it this problem that you want to address? Is it people in your life, right, that inspire you and kind of bring that to the forefront? Is there a goal that you have that gets you into that place where you're motivated to keep moving forward? What are those? When do they happen, right? Articulate what that fire feels like, right? Because not every fire is the same. Some are small and comforting. Others are hot and burn things down and kind of demand change, right? What does the texture and tone and dimension, what does the color of it look like? Knowing that there are white flames, yellower ones, there's ones that burn blue because they're so hot. What does that look like for you in these different spaces? What are the fuels that keep you going? For some, it might actually be the quiet time where you're not tending the fire to recharge. For others, it's interactions with people, right? And so maybe it's a topic, a theme, an impact. What are the things that keep that fire burning, right? So that's some of that introspective part. Now, thinking about the world around you. So in the Bandura's social cognitive theory, that environment piece, what are the things that are holding you back? Is it the narratives that you're hearing in the world around you? Is it something that somebody actually said to you, right? What are these elements? And being able to name and identify them, right? That's the first step to be able to address and find ways to grapple with them. And I use the word grapple instead of solve because many of these things don't go away, and just full disclosure, but you find tools and ways to kind of wrestle with, hold the dualities and the realities out there in a way that allows you to keep that fire burning. And even though it's your fire, you're not the only one who has to maintain it. Who can help you keep it going, right? But in order to understand who can help you, like, what do you need to keep that fire going? Is it champions and advocates to help you navigate the environment? Is it a hype person who can keep you going to be like, no, you got this, here's some things you need? Is it an instructor because it's that knowledge element of Bandura's triangle right at that top, those personal elements? Maybe it's an instructor, someone who can help you learn the ropes so that you have a better expectation of what comes next, right? Being able to identify first, and then articulate your needs is the first step to identifying who might be able to help you or who can help connect you to the correct resources so that you're able to make it through the process. And notice, I didn't necessarily use the word application here because these are also skills that could be really helpful and a way of thinking to get you through business school and even your career, right? The application process is just one step on the longer journey of your life. So really positioning it within that kind of framework and thinking beyond. Being able to articulate the things that you care about, what you want to do next, is going to be essential as you carve out your career path, right? Being able to demonstrate that you have the skills, the leadership abilities, right? Tell me about a time when. Yes, it's important, the application process, but ultimately that's also how you're going to be pitching yourself for a new job or this idea you have, that you are the right person for this. Or thinking about tests, transcripts, whatever, kind of on that smaller scale. Okay, here's evidence that I'm going to thrive in the classroom. All right, where else might it be? What are the skills and abilities that you need to be able to be successful in the classroom, whether it's the GSB or elsewhere? Maybe you don't have a lot of quant background, right? Maybe you're doing some focused studying to help support so that once you hit the ground in business school, you hit the ground running. Because one way to even think about the GSB application is less like gatekeeping, but where's the evidence that they're going to be able to thrive in business school, right? Because we're not just admitting students, we're admitting future alumni and folks who are going to be out there in the world. We want you to be able to do well here. So what are the things that you need to be able to set yourself up for success once you're at school or whatever that next job might look like for you? Or that next step rather, not just a job, right? Because sometimes organizations, impacts, it's the relationships in your life. All of these things can be applied across multiple spaces of your life. So I'm going to pause there, take a moment of peace. I know we probably took a direction today that you might not have been expecting out of an application workshop week. But once again, I do think that there are a lot of application adjacent things about how we understand who we are, what's possible, and this place that may or may not be familiar to you. Stanford, GSB, business school, places that might be a world away. Those are still, I think, super critical in how we might be able to approach this process in a way that helps you put your best foot forward and empowers you beyond just the application outcomes. Okay. So once again, my friend Helen, leaving you with a smiling face. And now with that, we're going to turn over and I'm going to go to the Q&A box. So thank you to everybody who's gotten the conversation started. So once again, I'm going to focus on some of these broader, less tactical, practical questions. But if there's something that keys in with the theme of today's conversation, definitely I'll be jumping in there. I am also going to be sorting by most upvote. So if there's a question that resonates for you, please feel free to put the thumbs up button. And then again, many of these are just observations and anecdotes over my decade plus years of experience in admissions, and not the capital T truth of anything for that matter. Okay, so lots of disclaimers, but you know, we don't often get to talk about kind of this kind of adjacent space. So Brianna, thank you for this question. How do you reconcile the concepts of past behavior actions as an indicator of future behavior success and making a pivot, which often involves some level of dissatisfaction and or unsuccess with the previous path? Ooh, so let's do it this way. So growth mindset, Carol Black, there's some really awesome research out there about thinking about what are some of the actions that you've and ways that you've approached kind of that post-event, like have you learned, have you grown, what actions have you taken to reconcile, improve, iterate on these moments of quote unquote unsuccess or dissatisfaction? So for example, not to make this about me, but sometimes it helps to have an example here. So I was actually in a doctorate program and I was in it for 5 years. There was a day that I woke up and I was more excited teaching some of my intro classes because that was part of how I was funding myself, was teaching at the university. And I was so much more excited getting people interested and excited and seeing the possibility of science beyond just a prereq check mark on the way to what comes next. I was more excited about that than my own research. It took a while before I came to this place, but ultimately I left. I left the program. I did not leave with any credentialing. In some ways, in a lot of ways, especially in the immediate aftermath of that, it felt like, to your word, unsuccess. But now looking back, I can connect the dots. At that moment, it was hard, not knowing what the next steps were, but looking back, you can always think about, who are you because of that? Because of that, I was able to move into a space that I finally found that I could be impactful, that was meaningful for me. Continuing to work with students helped me find the world of admissions. Here, it re-inspired me to go back because I felt like I could make a difference. I could help people feel empowered and find their own journeys, that it got me over the original experience. You might be able to say trauma, depending on how you talk through it, of my grad experience. Inspired me to go back for another grad degree, realizing that there are different outcomes. Using that knowledge, right, I've been able to help create some of the system, practices, policies, things like application week that I hope are making an impact out there. So think about not just the actions that led up to that moment of unsuccess, but what happened after. Who are you because of it? What are some of these lessons and understandings about who you are? What might you have done differently in those situations? And I think approaching those as pivot points in life, as milestones that help inform the perspective you bring, can often help them become not anchors of past experience, but the inspiration for growth and these new perceptions and understandings of self. So hopefully that starts the conversation of what some of these moments of unsuccess might manifest as. There's that. So thank you for sharing that, Brianna. Okay, so we got that. So what does the application review process look like from the point of view of the admissions team? Are applications reviewed by a team, multiple people, or a single person? So Matodi, hopefully you have been tuning into some of the application workshops. Definitely encourage you to check out one of our information sessions. We go into that at length. I talk a lot about the holistic review process. And as a professional team, so there are places where faculty are much more involved in the admissions process. At the GSB, it is a full-time staff who are trained, and this is our area of expertise, to be able to read applications, honor the process and your experiences, and where we need to source expertise from each other, do research to make sure we're honoring that. So it is a team effort. So know that there is a lot of training and an investment to make sure we're able to do this in a way that's ethical and fair for everybody involved. For more, definitely check out some of these, the application workshops, to get a sense for how we approach it as well. Because as much as the tactical of what we do, I think the philosophy and our kind of approach to it can help position you better to put your best foot forward. Okay, so Betty, can I speak a little bit more about the balance of conveying aspirational goals while being grounded in the feasibility of these goals? I love this question because think about your audience. Who and where are you speaking to? Because there might be times where the goal is to think big, right? Maybe you don't want to hold back and say, here's this big thing I want to do. What are the steps to make it a reality? Right? It might not be right now. It might be sometime down in the future, but just because it's big does not mean it's impossible, right? It's okay to hold and name it. Here's a big thing that's inspiring me, it's driving me. I might not be able to achieve it, but maybe I can get a little bit closer, and here's how I can do that, right? And so just being honest with yourself and whoever you're speaking to, totally okay. And I think each one of us articulates this in a different way. So find the balance that is meaningful for you, that feels truthful to how you're approaching it, honoring kind of the question at hand, right? So hopefully, and the setting. So hopefully that'll kind of give you a little bit more freedom, but also guidance in how you might be able to approach it. Again, there's no single right way. And honestly, in the GSB application process, to be kind of a little bit more explicit, I don't care about your big goals and aspirations in the way that you might be thinking. Again, I'm not trying to say, is this realistic? Has this person put in the work to do that thing? But rather, given those things that they want to pursue, have they thought about what it might take to get there, right? Is business school the right thing for them, and have they been able to articulate that, right? Again, I have no preference for what that rationale is, as long as you've put some of that thought process in there. I'm never going to hold you accountable to whether or not you're doing that thing or if you achieve it ultimately. So kind of lean into the things that inspire you, lean into the places that fire, like you feel that warmth, that fuel, and lean into things, like I said, that fuel you in that direction. So went a little bit back into that kind of intangible space, but sometimes it's the intangible that informs and phrases some of these things that ultimately end up being like the phrases and language and kind of communication styles that you use. Does GSB look for evidence of self-awareness and EQ in different areas of the application? How can we showcase them? Great question, Anushka. So the answer is yes and no, because for some folks, that is how you might have made that impact in the spaces you're in. For others, you have actually done it in other ways. Maybe it's identifying strategy, and we honor and appreciate any and all of those. If there are, so there's no need to try to over strategize and say, whatever. Think about 2 or 3 times that you're proud of, that you felt impactful. What did you do and how, right? Tell me about a time when, and that's going to be the way to showcase whatever it is, whatever that leadership competency that you use to make that impact. Again, some people have demonstrated through self-awareness and EQ. Others have demonstrated it through kind of sharp strategic insight, kind of driving results, burning that midnight oil. So again, no preference one way or the other. Speak your truth. All right, let me pull this up. Okay. How do we connect the dots? Do we really need to connect the dots? There may be multiple impactful experiences. How do we select which ones to talk about? So great question, Lucky. You don't have to connect the dots if you don't want to, right? You can tell one consistent story. You can tell a story in different chapters. There is no expectation in the GSB application that it has to be one cohesive thing. If anything, if you think about it, you are the connector of your life. So it all depends on the question and how you want to approach answering it. So I have no preference one way or the other. Answer it in whatever way makes sense for you. Let's see. Okay, so couple themes here that were emerging that my team is helping elevate: book recommendations for approaching personal growth, stepping into one's power, social cognitive theory. So I actually haven't been reading a lot of books, like published books. I've been reading a lot of like research articles. So that's kind of where I've been spending a lot of my space. And I've been using a lot of Google Scholar to help guide me in that direction and figure out things that that inspire me. But there are a lot of really awesome books out there. I don't want to take responsibility for pushing one over the other, though I will say sometimes the going back to the original research can be super eye-opening, even if it takes a little bit longer to unpack and discern, because some of them do use some kind of convoluted language. But there's lots of different ways to kind of engage with it in spaces that are exciting. So sorry if I'm a little bit less helpful on kind of the easily digestible books out there. Okay, question about the tone of voice in the applications. How authentic do you think one should be? In the context of a business school application, is there a default formal tone that seems appropriate? But do you recommend applicants write in a way that's true to them regardless of the reader? I appreciate this because of kind of that notion of authenticity. So thinking about the GSB application, what are the questions at hand? So I don't expect you to write one way versus another, right? And there are multiple spaces in the application. So maybe what matters most to you and why, the right approach for you that you feel fully captures what you're trying to convey might be a little, maybe it's more creative or you're doing something differently. Totally okay. For things like tell me about a time when, it might be more factual. If there's something additional information, you're being succinct, straight to the point. So it really is up to the question at hand. I am not determining whether or not you're writing in the right format. It's more about what I'm trying to understand about you. As long as, use your best judgment and understand, am I clearly communicating whatever it is I want about me, right? And so hopefully that'll help you along the way. How can we work with the feeling that we haven't done enough to become competitive for MBA? So what does enough mean? And I think trying to unpack what some of these expectations are and where they're coming from, I think that might be one of the first steps there. And so are these notions and images that hold truth to them or not? Where might we be able to find counter narratives or other spaces to help us look at things from different perspectives? The notion of enough, I think, is so subjective that at some point, there is going to be a moment where you just need to block that out. Spinning it the other direction. What have you done? Come back to these actions you've taken. We're also all storytellers. Each and every one of you has told at least one story in your life. And if you think about a personal statement, an essay, any kind of response in an application, think of it as a story. Tell me about a time, hun. What are some of these things that help demonstrate kind of the actions you've taken? Take me there. And I think in articulating those, it's less about you needing to try to interpret, I am determined, I am innovative, right? So relieve yourself of the pressure to try to have to show that and prove it to someone and just say, here's who I am, here's what I did. Here's what's important to me. Take ownership over that part. That's where you're able to spend the most constructively spend your energy. There is an analogy out there of like trying not to go over the net. So think in tennis or volleyball, there's that net up, pickleball. I know there's some pickleball enthusiasts out there. There's that net. You have control of what happens when the ball's on your side. You are Venus Williams, you are cracking that backhand down the line. You have that under your control. You don't know where the ball is coming or what that other opponent's going to do. Maybe you're playing your sister Serena. You don't know what she's going to do. So rather than trying to worry too much about that, figure out, okay, what can I do? What's in my control? How can I regain this power? Are there ways to reframe the question, the approach, or how I am kind of understanding this so that I can, again, understand what fuels me, what keeps that fire burning bright, and who might be the people in my world who can help me kind of continue keeping this bright. So that was, again, a little mushy-gushy, but oftentimes it's these intangible moments that can really be the spark, and not to keep coming back to this fire analogy, but that spark that can really burn things down, however you want to define that in the spaces you're in. So thank you once again for joining Application Week. Thank you for joining me on this a little bit more experimental session. Thank you for engaging me with the questions about the process, some of that meta approach to it. For more information, definitely check out our website, email us questions. We will be posting these videos shortly. It takes me a little bit of editing because I am on a budget. So I will be doing some of the editing. Our team will be posting them soon. So we also have application workshops that already exist on YouTube. So if anything, search Stanford GSB application workshop. My face should pop up. There's a whole series of them. They will lead to each other. You got this. Believe in you. Burn it down. Take care, everybody.